Welcome back to another SuperCoach video with me, JD. As I mentioned, I will sporadically be dropping videos, I guess, throughout the preseason, or on the lead up to preseason anyway. We're not even really in the preseason, still this year of footy and, almost grand final time, which is great. It's actually been a really crazy week when it comes to some of the news stories that have dropped that have been obviously quite horrible. But one thing I did want to share, because a few people in the Discord have been asking, they know I've been keeping this, is my way too early 2023 cheat sheet. And I'll get to that shortly. I'm sure we're going to talk for a little while because more than 50 players on the list at the moment. So I'll show the full cheat sheet for those who just want to have a look at the names and then bounce. By all means, I'll waffle on for a bit for anyone else that wants to kind of hear some of the early insights behind these. But before I show it, I just wanted to preface it with this is obviously a long list of players. Not all of them are born equal. Some are much more likely than others to make teams next year. But it is just meant to be a kind of broad starting list. We'll cull a lot of these pretty quickly, especially as things happen throughout the offseason, which give us insight as to whether or not they'll be relevant for next year. There'll also be other players that I haven't got on here that will end up making the list through, trade period, preseason, whatever it may be. If there's players you think I'm missing now that I should be considering for next year, drop them down in the chat below. Otherwise, yeah, this is just something that I guess a little bit of fun for those hardcores that are already starting to plan for next year. So here is the list without further ado. There's actually a pretty good split across lines, and I've kind of broken it into three main sections, which is firstly that they're off injury, second that they have like some type of like cheap value player with like some breakout potential, and third value primo. So I've kind of excluded a lot of the rookies that we'll get next year. We haven't even gone through the draft yet. Also excluded, I guess, like top price premiums because they're easier to pick and not the ones that you necessarily need to watch as much throughout the preseason. So when it comes down to like what are the picks that make or break your side next year, it's really where you get that value. That's where you get the leg up on the competition, being able to find those value picks and players across the competition. And through some of the fundamental series, if you checked that out last year that I put out, or even if you just listened to my philosophy throughout the year, there are a few main ways that we find these value players. One is that they are coming off injury, and so they've either had an injury-interrupted year and scored or averaged less than they otherwise would, or they've missed, a large parts of the season and are getting a discount from the SuperCoach team on their price when it comes to next year, and they're becoming undervalued as a result of that. So these players are obviously a little bit riskier because they're coming off injury, but they do have inbuilt value into their price. The second is those that are changing clubs or moving clubs. And usually these players are moving for opportunity elsewhere. So things like more midfield time, which is what we cover highly. It could just be that they're looking for a spot in the best 22, but these players often present value. A good example of that this year was obviously Will Brodie. A good example of coming off injury and having discount would be Witts, who was one of the better picks last year, or Sicily. And then, club change like Brodie is a really good example. Hewitt was a really good example of that this year as well. Third kind of group here is that you're looking for some type of like role change, which very much is similar to the club change, just usually in team is, I guess, the difference in how I've broken this out, but these can often be coupled together. So good examples of this year were like Harry Himmelberg, who's made the list if you've already spotted ahead, who scored much better in defense than he did as a forward. And that's generally the moves that you're looking for here are things like they become solo ruck, they get midfield time, or they become like a loose rebounding defender. They're kind of like the three changes into position that you see that make players more valuable. So someone like George Hewitt not only moved club, but also moved position as well. But like the club change is really the impetus for that. And that's kind of how I would color someone in this, given I can just use only one color per cell. Like I could do this a little bit better than what I have, but it's just meant to be a kind of quick preview. It's not meant to be that deep. And then the last category here that you can kind of find value in is those that break out or like have natural growth. And this is the hardest category by far to predict for a couple of reasons. One, knowing when players are going to make that or take that next step is really hard. I think the most successful pick for this was when people jumped on Oliver I think in his second year, he went from being a really good rookie to being a premium in year 2, which kind of just doesn't happen. So if you find those picks, it's great, but this is by far the hardest category to rely on. And usually when players take a step up through natural progression, they're not making large leaps when it comes to SuperCoach points, which means there's generally less value in these picks. But there is a whole bunch of interesting ones that we'll just chuck on the list anyway. So yeah, this is, as I mentioned, it is a wide net we're starting with. Some of these are much less likely than others. They're just on there. There's some color coding based on like what kind of category I think they fall into. Some you could probably argue that they fall into one of these categories, even if I don't have them shaded. And then, yeah, we've got the 3 kind of different categories, which I partly put these into like, the off injury, cheap breakout value primo is just kind of help with mentally framing, I guess, where they would line up in your side and who they're kind of competing against. But it's not always perfect. So let's then go through each of the lines. So defense, there's 13 players in here. In the off-injury section, we've got someone that's probably been in this bit for a little bit for a while, which is Lockie Whitfield. Yeah, we say no GWS players, but Whitfield looked markedly different once Leon Cameron was gone second half of the year. He obviously was carrying some groin problem in the first half of the year as well, which has led to him being cheap. The problem is, like, can you trust him ever again? Not sure, but one to monitor to see what new coach does and see how he gets through the preseason. Williams is an interesting one. Has basically a premium scorer in the past when he was at GWS, but hasn't really found his groove at Carlton, and there are rumours he's on the trade block. So if he does get moved to another club and gets put into a position where he can kind of really dominate off half back, again, he would be interesting. At Carlton, not the case. With Sard and Doherty there, it's just, I don't see the potential for them to support him into that premium range as well. But if he was to land at a third club, then one that you could look at. Salem is very discounted based on what his best looks like, but we just haven't seen good enough form from him. And over the final series, he was particularly not good. So this is someone I've cooled on quite a bit, but on the list for visibility. Jack Bose has probably become more interesting. So this 274 price tag, like these orange ones, they all vary between 10 and 30% discounts based on games that they've missed. It would have been better if I'd list how much of a discount was required, because what may happen is someone like Bose could get a discount, and if I've got 30% here, he may only get 10, which would drastically change his price. So look, these are all estimates for next year anyway, so they may change a bit, but for some of them, it's kind of like it's assumed 30% discount, and if they don't get that 30% discount, then they're just not really that interesting as an option anyway. So we'll see what happens with these. So Bose was rumoured to be going back into the Gold Coast midfield this year before getting injured. At 274k, being able to pick a defender as a midfielder would have been really interesting. Now the talk is that he's going to another club. They're looking to offload his salary, and there's no shortage of clubs lining up for that. It seems like Bose is willing to go as well. So it's I'd say like 99.9% chance that he's at another club next year. So where he goes will then slightly determine whether he's viable or not. But yeah, this could be a very good pick. Geelong looks the front runner at the moment, and I don't know where they put him at Geelong, which makes him a little bit tricky. And then Jones, who I think looks like the Bulldogs might pick him up, but he's quite a discounted price given what he's performed in the past. Let's have a quick look, actually, if he's in here. Sorry, I'm going to use some of the other tools just to quickly check as we go along. Liam Jones, so what, his best year was a 77.3, kind of done 70s. That's not amazing for 263, but I guess if we're really short of rookies, it's someone you could kind of look at. At his age, he's probably not doing career bests. If you could guarantee 80, would you take him at 270? I guess you probably would. This is like less likely though. In this kind of like cheaper breakout section, you've got Perryman, who did really well once he moved into midfield. Not sure if he keeps that next year, but given that Hopper and Taranto, I always want to say Green, but Hopper and Taranto both look like they're leaving. This is potentially a pick. He's like top price at 513. Redmond and Young kind of both rebounding defenders that have shown like steps this year. I think Young's probably the more talented of the two, but yeah, both like potential options. And then Dacos obviously has just been phenomenal as a first-year player. Doesn't play like a first-year player. And if we're talking about that Clayton Oliver style of rookie that could take the step second year, then he could be the one. I guess it just depends on what role they want to play him next year. If they're still playing him kind of loose behind the ball the way he's been played, then I think he's absolutely someone that is deserved of this list. I'm not as sure if I'm a believer if he moves up the field more. I think the role may not be as friendly for him. I guess some concern around, like, I think he'll get more tags second year just given he does so much of their attacking out of the back line. But yeah, one for the list. And then Wilmot, like, I've only really got two rookie priced, like proper rookie priced, you know, the bottom 124K price plays in here. But Wilmot was one that a lot of people either had in their team at the start of the year as, you know, hopefully someone will come in, or those on watch lists. And still the case. Like, he looked really good in that Brisbane side during the finals and should be best 22, cheap for the start of next year. So one that'll find his way into a lot of teams. And then value primos. So effectively, like, there's not a ton of value in these, but there's a little bit more value compared to like top price players. So Stewart, I think, priced at like 110 or something like that, without the concussion game, or like pre-concussion game was averaging much more, but even just if you just exclude the concussion game, it was probably a 114 average. He's gone up in average each of the 4 years he's been playing, I want to say. So there's not a ton of value in this, but like someone worthy of the spot. And then Dawson, we saw him continue to grow as a Crow player in the second half of the year. There's probably, I don't know, maybe this is my bias towards Dawson. There's probably a little bit of meat on the bone when it comes to that price. It's probably hard to see people starting both Stewart and Dawson, but yep. And then Brayshaw of the Angus variety. There's no point putting a Brayshaw in there, is there? So when he moved into the midfield for the last bit of the year, like averaged a bunch more when it comes to SuperCoach points. Should still be defender eligible. At this price, he's probably a bit of a steal. So I really like Brayshaw as an option at the start of next year, assuming he continues to play as a midfielder. In the midfield, there are 19 players on this list, and yeah, there's a lot of options to choose from next year. The one thing I will say is, especially when we get to the cheaper and value price players, is the top 8 are probably the most predictable in this line of any line. And I don't see why next year would necessarily be a large exception to that. So picking those guys that may be valuable but end up at like 10th or 12th overall for midfielders don't tend to be winning picks. So it's still probably the one area of the ground where I favor going proven players over like more speculative types and hoping they become premiums. We've seen that backfire a bunch, but you still can get mid prices here and those be very effective for you. So those coming off injury, there's actually like club change in Hopper's case. But yeah, Hopper is very interesting. Missed a lot of this year due to injury. Looks to be off to Richmond, right? Taranto and Hopper both going to Richmond. Yeah, he can produce way more than this. Let's have a look at Hopper. I wonder what his career best is. 96.9, and what he averaged 57.4, and should be getting a discount on top of that, I think. So clicking the wrong thing here. So yeah, at this price, he I think is going to be very popular once SuperCoach opens. Kerno, this is of the Ed variety. Let's go have a look at him because it's not someone that I've paid a lot of attention to, but he missed the whole year. Wait, how did Kerno not come up with anything anyway? Did I mistype it? So yeah, hasn't played this year. Previous best of like a 102. Coming off at 86, not great. I guess like the hard thing is like what role is he gonna play, because his best scoring was as a midfielder. They've got too many mids now. I think this is one that's going to come off this list pretty quickly. Yo and Sheed are the next two. Like the problem is both these Eagles boys are very injury prone, but can produce far better than what's here. I think I'd like to see playing behind the ball next year. Just gives him a little bit more durability. We've seen him score very well there. He'd also then get defender eligibility, and with the new DPP changes, that means that you could move him back in round 6. So would be very interesting at this price if he was playing as a defender. Sheed is a pure mid at 255k, seems like a bit of a steal as long as his body is right over the preseason. Then a few other ones here, like Cunnington. I can't imagine they'll let him be this cheap. But North still needs leaders around the midfield. 188, he's best 22. Like this would be a pretty easy rookie priced pick. This is Nick Cox, who missed the year, I believe. The question for him is like, what role is he playing next year? Are they moving him as a forward? Is he playing as a wing still? What's going on? But this could be value. And then Phillips from North, same thing, especially with the new coach. It seems like he was out of favor a bit this year, but maybe could come back into favor. High pedigree. So yeah, one to consider. These are all like really interesting cheap options, with Cano probably being the least interesting of the lot. Then followed by Cox. We saw a bunch of young players take a next step this year. So the next 4 kind of all in the same category of like LDU, Anderson, Green, Warner. These are future stars of the competition that all took a step forward and are all at the cusp of being premium. LDU probably had the most dominant period at the back half of the year, but we saw Warner be a match winner. We've seen Anderson be a match winner. Actually, he did kick that goal of Siren. I guess that's the definition of match winning. And then Green was very good at the start of the year, then misused in role. He was playing ruck and stuff, and really came back to the pack on the back of that. So these are all ones that could be picked next year, but for the reasons I kind of mentioned, it's hard to pick these over some of the premium mids ahead of them. LDU is going to be under a new coach. That makes things a little bit difficult. Does Rao having another year under his belt affect Anderson? Green should be the one that is most clear. Once again, uncertainty around coach, but some of the competition for CBAs is now gone, so should have a good run at the role. And then Warner, I can't see a ton of upside, just purely because he's not getting more mid-time or anything like that. So you expect to see another small step in his game, but may not translate to him being viable in SuperCoach. Tom Mitchell, talk that he's being shopped around again. If he ends up in the right situation where he gets to go back to his old piggy role at 522k, that is very cheap, 100k cheaper than some of the top premiums you'd be paying for. So one that you could look at. And then Fiorini is the big one, who has been averaging massive numbers in the VFL, but not getting a chance at Gold Coast. Collingwood, I believe, is the most likely place for him to end up. And given that their midfield does lack some depth and talent, then he's one that could see himself with a starting spot there for next year. 356k is at the pricier end, but definitely someone that could be viable. It's just hard because you do have some of these other, either proven or cheap options over here that would be competing. 150k on 350 is still 500k he's got to get to kind of be worth it. But he'll be thereabouts if he moves, if he gets opportunity in midfield, etc., etc. And then Finn McRae, he's similar boat to Wilmot. He played a couple of games this year. They didn't go particularly well. Let's see how he goes next year and what preseason brings, depending on who Collingwood brings in for the midfield as well. May depend on whether or not he gets a run at it. But yeah, I think he's one that could come off this list pretty quickly. And the value premium sections, there's a few here. I believe in some of these definitely, like more or less than others. So McRae wouldn't have been on this list, and actually probably wouldn't even been someone I've been considering next year. But if Dunkley goes and the CBAs go back to him over being spread out through the other dogs, we should see him improve his SuperCoach scoring again, which would make him value at his price, especially given his durability. Walsh and Parish both at 603k. Parish obviously affected by injury this year, so kind of came back from where he was previously. And then Walsh is a little bit the same. Didn't have the best run at it, and then also issues with injuries in Carlton more broadly seem to affect him. Although I'm a little bit worried just about how he's going to go with their fully stacked midfield as it stands. So 117 back to 111, and then what was Parish? 114, and that was like an undercooked 114 back to 111. So these both have a little bit of value potentially in here. Steele is like the really obvious one. I don't know how much he went back. It would have been like, I don't know, more than 10 points a game compared to last year, but he's still a very good player. Obviously had the shoulder injury this year, but yeah, like that's probably my walk-up start. And then Dunkley, if he's a forward, it's like an easy selection. Probably first picked forward again. But if it looks very likely he's going to Brisbane at the moment, even if he's not a forward, I think he might be viable pick as a mid only next year. He's currently getting something like 50% CBAs. If he goes to 70 or 80% at the Lions, wherever he ends up, then yeah, you could see him take another step forward in his SuperCoach scoring. All right, Rucks here. This is going to be an interesting line next year, I think. Gawn would have been the one that a lot of us would have been looking to, especially with Jackson leaving. But Grundy, apparently his most likely situation is for him to end up at Melbourne, which to me seems crazy that you've got two of the better rucks in the league and also that much of your salary cap invested in them. I guess like it goes to part of their methodology around winning centre clearances, or just like clearances in general. But I don't know, it seems like a strange list choice to me personally. But it also means, for a Supercoach perspective, it makes Gawn much less interesting because Grundy and Gawn will be sharing time. So Grundy was my first, he's going to be cheap given what he's produced in the past. Fresh club, fresh opportunity. Maybe gets a bit of that hunger back to perform and to do well. It would have been good value at 506. But yeah, if he's at Melbourne, it's not as interesting, and it also makes Gawn less interesting. There's a bunch of other rucks here that have all had various levels of success in the past, apart from, I guess, Teakle, and they're quite heavily discounted. So Lysett, Sinclair, Naismith, and yeah, then we've got Teakle here as well. Potentially could look at these as a mid-price option. None of these I don't think have really got keeper potential. Maybe Lysett, but it just kind of depends on the ruck situations that they've got, how fit they are over the preseason, etc., etc. Some of these have been before as well, so I can't see myself starting like a Sinclair or a Naismith unless I've got a rookie ruck that I'm starting at R3. Then in the cheap breakout, so Meek is an interesting one. Stuck behind Darcy at the moment. The few games he had, he impressed, so he's actually priced quite expensively. There's not a lot of value in him, which is a little bit disappointing because you almost have to pick him as a keeper now, and I would have much preferred to keep him as a mid-price option that I could make money off and then trade. But if he lands somewhere else, I think Hawks are interested, then that is someone you could look at. Cherry was a successful pick for a lot of us at the start of this year, but injury obviously hurt. He's still priced quite cheaply, depending on what happens with Goldie, who I assume is playing for another year. But if he wasn't for any reason, Cherry was solo ruck, then 388k, I think that's potentially good value. Reeves, what happened with Reeves this year? He didn't play a lot of games, did he? I can't remember if he was why does it not find it? Yeah, so he played 5 early, then another 7 late. I think he had injury problems, didn't he? But he was 82 off his first 5 games, and then he put up 60 this year. So he can produce a lot better than this. It kind of depends on Hawks ruck situation next year, but yeah, potentially one. And then Strawn, who's the backup to Rob at Adelaide, is potentially very cheaply priced, but yeah, once again, depends on opportunity. And the value premium range, gone, but we've kind of mentioned that already. And that leaves 2 others. So Marshall without Ryder, if they're not playing Tom Campbell or replacing Ryder with another ruck, then Marshall at 500k seems like a no-brainer. He scores very well when solo ruck. And then English is the other one that we could potentially look at. Was obviously off to a really good start this year before concussion, and I think he had an injury problem as well, which brought his average down a lot through the back end of the year. So definitely some value in this. I guess Darcy could be on here for the same reason. Let's have a look. Yeah, I mean he did 118 in 2021, and now he did a 102. I guess the problem is it sounds like Luke Jackson may end up with him, so that kind of makes him less interesting. If he didn't, someone that would go on this list pretty quickly. And in the forwards, which seems to be make or break pretty year, but as of right now, and I know I'm jinxing myself by saying this, it looks like it won't be as hard as other years next year. Maybe it will be for rookies, but not for some of the other picks. So coming off injury, you've got Fife at 309k, which is very cheap if he is fully fit in the off season. Yeah, like obviously that looks pretty good. Oscar Allen from West Coast, probably like some of these are like key tools, right? Like Allen, King, Bruce. They're all cheap, but you kind of have to rely on them scoring pretty well, like doing near historical best and then spiking with a, like 100 because they kick a bag or something for you to make your money off them well enough. I can't imagine we'll get all of these as cheap as that. Like Bruce at 159 would be nuts. He might not be best 22 for the Dogs next year though if they decide to play Ugelhagen and Darcy, for example, in the forward line ahead of him and let them grow. But yeah, like McLean, we saw kind of back to his best in the final series a little bit. So at 198k, if he's got a role again, it'd be very good value. Fantasia, too many injury concerns, I think. But yeah, potentially there at 235. Like a lot of these are, can they get through a full preseason? And then for some of them, like McLean, it's like, are they best 22? And to be honest, we may only pick one or none of these because I like a lot of these other options. So Taranto, if he moves teams in the guts full time, I think he's value at this price. Harry Himmelberg, assuming he stays behind the ball and plays that loose role, very good value. And he should have DPP, so could be defender or forward. And then Thomas at North, like obviously very heavily underperformed this year. He is very cheap as a result. There is rumors that he could get pushed out and find his way to a new club. I think it's very unlikely that this pick works out at the moment, but we'll just see what happens over the preseason. He is one that could come off this list quite quickly. And then value premiums, there's lots that I like here. So Butters and Rosie from Port both showed really good signs when they're in the midfield. They're both injury prone is the only problem, but both have upside at this price. And I think if they were able to be healthy next year, they'd and get the mid-time, they're both top six forwards. You have Boak continuing to kind of fade away a bit. Port going after Dunkley, but it doesn't look like he'll land there, which would have been a bit of a red flag. And then Dillmore, who, was already scoring well as like that half-forward type player, but when he moved onto the ball, scored even better again, took that next level in his scoring. So there's some value in this price. So I like a lot of these as options in the forward line next year. And that's it. That's 56 players that are on the cheat sheet for 2023. Yeah, we'll update and add and adjust as we go. It's not exactly very pretty or scientific or anything like that, but just to make sure that some of the knowledge we've got from 2022 doesn't fade before the 2023 preseason starts. If there's anyone you're interested in particular, anyone that you think I should have on the list that I don't, or you've got any other questions, hit me up below. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Thank you very much.